Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading you some stories from Reddit about people whose lives have been saved by animals, mainly dogs in this one, but there's a few other random ones as well. So let's get into it. This first one says, when I was a kid, teenager, we had 2 golden retrievers. One lazy fall afternoon, I was sitting in my backyard with my mum on my childhood swing set, with Zach and Jazzy, the dogs, talking when Zach started to get very emphatic about going for a walk, or at least leaving the backyard quickly. We ignored them and continued to chat for a while, but he got more and more agitated, so eventually we figured we'd walk down the block with them. Well, we were about 50 yards away from my house when we heard a massive crack and a huge boom. Turns out one of the large trees in our backyard had died and a giant branch had snapped and fallen. The branch completely destroyed the swing set. It would have crushed us if we hadn't gotten up. Always thought he must have known something was amiss because it was pretty out of character the way he was acting. My best friend Dan had adopted a shelter dog, Blocks. Blocks was a whack job, boundless energy, very hard to housebreak. A challenging dog altogether. Nevertheless, Dan wasn't the kind of guy to give up on a dog, so he kept trying to get Blocks to listen. Her name, Blocks with a she, was coined because she was dumb as blocks, or so we thought. Blocks would consistently break out of the fenced-in yard by either jumping over a 6-foot fence or digging holes underneath it. We filled the holes, added boards pointed in at the top of the fence to keep her in the yard. Nothing helped. Blocks was not going to be kept in the yard. Dan eventually gave up on training her without a leash in the yard and put a stake in the ground for when he'd let Blocks outside. Blocks hated the leash, dug the stake up and would drag it around the yard, destroying Dan's grass. Dan still didn't give up because he's a resilient guy who loves animals more than people. And it's a good thing he didn't give up, or he'd be dead. One night Dan's little brother was at Dan's house with a bunch of other people, myself included, for a party. Blocks was chilling. As long as people were around, she was fine. She only really got anxious when she was alone. We partied well into the wee hours of the morning. I left around 3 a.m. to go home. Dan's brother stayed and crashed out in the basement. Dan's brother is a nice guy, but he's a moron in the truest sense of the word. This moron lit a candle next to a bottle of shower cleaner, propellant, and a shower curtain, wick, and fell asleep with it lit. You see where this is going yet? As his house was beginning to be swallowed in the roaring flames of the fire, Blocks ran into Dan's room, jumped on the bed, and started barking in his face, over and over and over and over until Dan woke up from his booze-soaked slumber. Dan actually pushed Blocks off the bed twice from his recollection, but Blocks was undeterred. She kept jumping back up on the bed. She wasn't allowed on the bed, and barking in Dan's face. Finally, Dan's drunk ass got up and couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Holy shit, thought Dan. My house is on fire. And he ran outside with Blocks chasing him. But Blocks wasn't done. Dan's moron brother was trapped in the basement. And remember how I said Blocks was only calm if people were around? Blocks had some kind of doggy sixth sense, and she knew he was in trouble. She stood at the top of those stairs, flames singeing her fur, smoke filling her lungs, barking non-stop so Dan's brother knew where the exit was. Every single person made it out alive. When the fire department came, one of the firemen took a liking to Blocks. Since Dan was now effectively homeless, he agreed to let the guy look after Blocks. Once Dan got back on his feet, he found the fireman to see about getting Blocks back. So he headed over to the fireman's house, and there was Blocks, happy, wagging and sitting in a yard, unrestrained. Blocks was now Bella, and she had 3 human kids who adored her. The fireman told Dan he could have his dog back, but Dan really is the kind of guy who loves animals more than people, even himself. He was crying when he got back in my truck that day. He said, "For the first time ever I can say one of my rescues is in a better place, and actually mean it." This happened to my cousin, 7 years old. We were in India on a top part of the highway, kind of like a bridge. Another highway goes under that part. And there was part of a mountain on the side with a lot of monkeys, macaques. They kept on trying to get our food and stuff. We were parked on the side to take a snack break, when all of a sudden my cousin is looking down at the other highway and starts to tip over the railing and is about to fall. One of the monkeys grabbed his shirt and pulled him back, saving his life. Yes, we gave the monkey some food. When I was a kid, we had a huge blizzard. It was 96 and my house in Baltimore had an alley behind it that dipped in the middle, so all of the snow had piled back there. It was at least 4 to 6 feet in some places, thanks to the wind. I was a small kid, barely 40 pounds by the time I was 8, and a little over 3 feet tall. So I went out to play in the snow, thinking going through a big alley would be like swimming through a pool. I learned a hard lesson that day. You can't swim through snow. So I'm stuck about a half block down from my yard, no one in sight. I'm yelling and crying and my tears are freezing to my stupid 8-year-old face. And then I see this awesome dog in a yard. He's barking at me, then barking towards his back door. This goes on for a few minutes and I'm still screaming. So dog jumps over the fence, and I'm not entirely sure how he didn't immediately sink, but he's licking my face, tapping me with his nose, and starts pulling me by my hood when his owner finally comes out and pulls me out of the snow and takes me to my mum. I gave that dog so many treats until they moved. My horse, Sunny. We lived in a rural area in Canada. My parents weren't too strict, so I was allowed to go out into the pasture on my own from age 6 and up. One day, while mindlessly walking my horse around, he started to act up, which was very odd for him. He was extremely laid back. I still paid no attention, kept leading him. Suddenly he knocks me over with his big head, ouch, and takes off into the brush. When he emerges from the brush, he was also chasing a pack of mangy-looking coyotes, at least 5 of them, who looked hungry enough to take down me, at the time a small child. I watched him chase them away for a long time. Then he deemed it was enough and came trotting back to me. Another time I fell off while riding him. He stopped, looked at me like I was an idiot, and waited for me to climb back on. My 18-month-old cousin was saved by her huge Saint Bernard, Nana. Her family lived out in the country, off a dirt road with no neighbours close by. She was playing outside with her 2 older sisters while my aunt, her mum, was washing dishes in the kitchen. Nana was a very quiet, well-behaved dog, so when my aunt saw Nana barking furiously and barreling past the window, she knew something was horribly wrong. She ran outside and saw a man had pulled over his car, leaned over to open the passenger side door, and was helping my cousin into the car. Nana charged the car, grabbed my cousin by the diaper, and ripped her out of the stranger's grasp. The Saint Bernard galloped back to the house with her screaming and wriggling and hanging by her arse from the dog's mouth as the man sped off. So, there I was driving my tricycle. Let me tell you about this tricycle. It was badass. 3 wheels, fire streaks on the side, super fast. Anyway, I'm driving my tricycle around the yard, and I'm stopped by this enormous gate surrounding our pool. My mum had always told me never to go inside the gate unless someone was in the backyard with me. But hey, the adults were right nearby in the kitchen, and I needed some more track for my tricycle racing. I unhatch the gate and go inside. As I'm riding around, of course, I fall into the pool. I was a decent swimmer for a 7-year-old, but something was dragging me down. My jeans had gotten caught in the pedal. The tricycle was sinking to the bottom of the pool and I was hanging onto a step. Unbeknownst to little me, my golden retriever was outside, barking up a storm. She was a very calm dog normally, but I'm told she was howling like she was on fire. My parents let her through the gate and she dove into the pool. At this point, the adults figured it out and I was rescued, all thanks to my loving dog, Brandy. I was walking my dog a couple of months ago. We were about to cross the road when she started pulling back toward the pavement. I thought it was just her being a pain, but I took her to the side anyway to be sure. What I hadn't seen was her pulling me away from a van that had mounted the curb and was doing about 60 miles per hour in a 20 school zone. It missed me by less than a meter and hit the area I was standing about 2 seconds before. When I was about 8 or so, I came downstairs to a living room flooded with carbon monoxide because of a boiler malfunction. After about 10 minutes sitting there watching cartoons, I was rendered unconscious by the gas and would have died if not for my cat. My mum came down and saw him, Bart the cat, lying in a very peculiar place on the carpet, and shouted to me asking what was wrong with him. After a couple of shouts and no replies, she came over to where I was lying and saw me seemingly asleep, foaming at the mouth. She immediately dragged me out of the house and called an ambulance. My life was saved. Bart wasn't as lucky. I'm alive because he died. If he wasn't there, my mum wouldn't have seen me and got me out of the house, and I wouldn't be typing this reply right now. I still get a bit worked up whenever I think about it. He saved my life. The dog we had when I was a kid, Lady, was hypersensitive to people she found to be off. When my grandmother was sick and in hospice, she had a nurse Lady absolutely hated. She barked at the woman non-stop, freaked out any time she was anywhere near the house, and at times had to be forcibly removed from the room when the nurse was in with my grandma. From the moment she stepped foot in our house, Lady hated her. My parents wrote it off initially as her being a little crazy. She was an English Springer Spaniel and prone to that kind of thing, until my mum came home earlier than expected from an errand one day. While Lady normally barked and ran to the door whenever someone came home, she was unusually quiet. Startled, my mum walked upstairs quietly and came to find the nurse screaming at my grandmother for having wet herself. Lady was standing in between them, quietly asserting herself in the situation to prevent further escalation, while smugly glancing towards the hallway where she, without a doubt, knew my mum was. My mum listened for a few moments to ensure she wasn't jumping the gun by freaking out on the woman, walked in, kicked her out, and called the hospice to inform them of what she had seen. We had the nurse working for us for about 2 months, and I hate to think about all the things that must have happened over the course of that time, with the nurse being there for 3+ hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week. Our best guess is that Lady's reaction to people coming home normally alerted the nurse of when she had to watch herself, and with what a spiteful, clever bitch Lady could be, that it was an intentional setup. I can only imagine that it killed her to be unable to do anything more than she had already, and pissed her off that we couldn't understand her or heed whatever she was trying to convey to us in doggy. She was one of those dogs who constantly seemed pained by the language barrier. So while not a story of a dog saving someone's life, I'm thankful Lady was able to make sure that the last months of my grandma's life weren't spent being abused by some psychotic elderly care worker. She was a fantastic dog, and we all took her disliking someone she just met a bit more seriously afterward. This happened to a family friend. I'll call her Jill. When Jill was around 10, she was walking her dog alone in the neighborhood. Some man came up to her and said, "I've lost my puppies. Can you help me find my puppies?" Immediately the dog became visibly anxious, making a low growl at the man and baring his teeth. Now this dog is the most friendly golden retriever you can imagine and loves strangers, so Jill knew right away this guy was not to be trusted. Jill told the man, "Sure, just let me take my dog home first." She started walking away and then started getting more scared the more he was following her, so she just broke out in a run and got the hell out of there. When she got home, she immediately told her parents and they called the cops. Later the cops caught the guy and found out he had in fact kidnapped and murdered children before. Around my 11th birthday, my family moved from a suburban neighbourhood to a more rural setup. Not too long before moving up here, same area I live now, our German Shepherd had a litter of puppies. They were Shepherd Rot mixes, and the two that we kept ended up growing to 110 to 120 pounds. The names were McGee and McGraw. In case you're wondering, yes, he was named after Quick Draw McGraw. McGee and McGraw were my dogs, by all accounts. As I started playing sports in high school, I would take them for a run through the woods every day to go from my house to the lake nearby and come back around dusk. The usual way this went was as follows. I call them, we take off at my jogging place. McGraw hangs fairly close to me, McGee runs around chasing everything. A few different times he jumped deer into the trail a bit too close for my comfort, but those are other stories. This story is still my favourite from them. I was on the typical run with them after school and practice. It was September-ish, so it was starting to get darker earlier. And on this particular night, I was sluggish, so we were still making our way home as dark approached. The trail is about 2 miles, and it's an overgrown access road to a fishery pond for the lake. At this point, I'm about halfway back, and in the thicker brush parts of the trail, something weird happens. Normally the previously described attitudes would be present until we got home. On this night the boys got very spooked, very fast. While McGraw would normally be out in front, just relatively close, he always had the protector personality. Tonight, at this point on the trail, his hair stood on end, and he started growling. Not loud, just enough. Next, McGee came out of the bushes as fast as I've ever seen him move, growling the same and hair on end. McGraw got behind me and McGee in front. They both growled louder, and all of a sudden I got the impression I was being herded. We made it back fairly quick. I trusted these dogs immensely, so when they acted like that, we made time back. I still can't say for sure that this was the case, as I never saw what spooked them, but it was no more than a week later that our neighbour's dog went missing, another neighbour's chicken coop was raided, and finally a few weeks later, only about a mile from the incident, a female mountain lion was shot while trying to kill a neighbour's goat. I'm certain that night I was being stalked by a mountain lion, and I'm certain those two dogs protected me. In the late 90s, my roommate and I were roaming campus late one night, came across a white German Shepherd puppy. No tags, couldn't find any owners nearby, so we took him home for the night. The next morning we called all the shelters and vets in the area, put a notice in the paper. It still took over a month before we found his owner. Meanwhile, my roommate was walking the puppy, who we were now calling Sugarfoot for reasons that now escape me, one evening after a really massive thunderstorm, and he kept pawing at a dumpster near an abandoned apartment complex. He absolutely refused to leave it alone, so she finally worked up the nerve to look inside, to find a tiny, shivering kitten in the one dry corner. He had been fussing so long he had screamed himself hoarse. The kitten became known as Tyler, and Sugarfoot was extremely protective of him until we found his true owners. Fast forward a few years and I'm now living on my own elsewhere in town, but Tyler is still with me. There is a known serial killer on the loose, but the supposed descriptions seem to change daily. One day the police say they're looking for a pizza delivery driver. Guess what I was doing for a living at the time? The next it was a white man in his 40s driving a red truck, and a few others I can no longer recall. One night I was lying in bed with the window open and reading a book before going to sleep. Tyler usually curls up with me or sits in the window. Tonight, however, he was growling at something outside. He'd growl, jump into bed, stare at me intensely, then jump back to the window to repeat the process. The first few times I just kind of shooed him away. When I couldn't get him to stop, I decided to close the window, only to look right into the face of a peeping Tom that was causing my cat to go nuts. I screamed, slammed the window shut, and called apartment security. I figured they could get help to me faster than a 911 call could. They never found anyone. However, a few months later they caught the serial killer. His parents happened to live less than a quarter mile from me, and he'd been living with them at the time. It was dark outside the night I encountered my peeping Tom, and the guy was very dark-skinned, so I'll never be entirely positive. But I believe that is who I saw that night, and my cat possibly saved me from becoming one of his victims. Tyler passed away at the ripe old age of 15 last year due to kidney failure. I miss him every day. I was standing on a milk crate to mount my very tall horse when the crate broke. My left foot went through the stirrup, my right foot went through the crate, and the noise of the splintering crate spooked my horse. He started to bolt, and if he'd taken off, I'd have been dragged across concrete under his legs and most likely killed. At the last second, he turned around and made eye contact, and he just seemed to know I was in trouble, and froze. He was shaking like a leaf, but he didn't budge. I was able to pull myself up on his neck and free my right foot from the crate, and then my left foot from the stirrup, but things could have ended so much worse. So my life wasn't directly saved by an animal, but I wouldn't be here if this hadn't happened. When my dad was a toddler, they lived in a trailer park while their house was being built. They had a boxer named Shemp. He was basically the park's mascot and had the run of the place, and apparently treated all the kids that lived there like his own. But my dad was his obvious favourite, and whenever he was outside, Shemp wasn't far away. So my dad was playing outside, and my grandma went to the side of the trailer for a moment, and something must have caught my dad's eye across the street, because he got up and started walking across. A car was coming around the corner and didn't see him. Fortunately, Shemp ran over and grabbed my dad by his diaper and got him out of there. My grandma had just come back and saw the whole thing, but obviously it was too late to do anything immediate. Apparently it took a good half hour before Shemp would let him go, carrying him around by his diaper the whole time. My dad was apparently completely happy with that. One time I was hiking with some friends and I was leading them down an overgrown deer path that I had found that led to a creek. As I was walking, a diamondback rattlesnake came out on the path and started hissing and rattling at me. My friends didn't see that I stopped and ran into me, effectively sending me face down into the dirt, inches away from the rattler. All of a sudden a hawk flew down from a tree and snatched the rattler before it could bite me. Thank you, random hawk. Fly free and eat snakes. I think we'll leave it there on that note, guys. I don't have any of my own stories like this, really, but I did have a dog growing up. I grew up on a property and he was sort of always with us. Everywhere we went, we would just always be outside, barefoot, playing in the grass. And there was a lot of brown snakes and God knows what out there. And he definitely killed a few snakes that were kind of near us, so he might have saved our lives sometimes. Anyway, I hope you liked this one, guys. Feel free to leave any of your own stories in the comments. I'll see you next time.